Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the hidden blueprints that have shaped human reality for thousands of years. We're talking everything from the epic poems that defined our gods, all the way to the algorithms that are now defining our choices.
Every single society, throughout all of history, has had to wrestle with this exact question, and they all came up with powerful frameworks to explain reality. These are the blueprints we build our lives on, the stories that give us meaning, the rules that create order, and the systems that govern our lives. Really, they're our best attempt to draw a map of a chaotic world.
All right, let's dive into this journey. Think of it like we're climbing a ladder of ideas, seeing how our most fundamental blueprints for the world have evolved over millennia. And we're going to start with our oldest and, you could argue, our most powerful tool.
Right. We begin with stories. And what's fascinating is that right from the get-go, we find two totally different ways of trying to capture the truth of what came before us.
This slide just lays out the contrast so perfectly. On one hand, you have Homer, where truth is all about divine will, and these larger-than-life heroes. I mean, the gods literally speak, and men are terrified. But then, on the other hand, you've got the historian Thucydides. He sees truth in the predictable, often brutal patterns of human behavior. He's basically saying, hey, this stuff will happen again and again just because people are people.
And this is exactly what happens when those stories are gone. The archaeologist Stephen Mithen makes his brilliant point that when we're just left with, silent artifacts, we have this dangerous temptation to fill in the blanks with our own assumptions, projecting our world back onto theirs. It really shows you just how essential these narrative blueprints are and how kind of lost we are without them.
Okay, so stories help us make sense of the past. But what about the present? I mean, how do you actually build a stable, functioning society? Well, for that, you need a totally different kind of blueprint. You need a source code for social order.
So, along comes the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau with this pretty radical idea. He argues that the rules that really matter, the legitimate ones, don't come from a king or a god way up high. Nope, they come from within the community itself, from something he calls the general will. It's this idea that we, together, decide the rules that bind all of us.
And here you can see three fundamentally different operating systems for society. First, you've got divine command, which is a clear top-down instruction manual. This is clean, this is unclean, period. Then you have this idea from Confucius, which is all about cultivating personal virtue. Society works because good people act the right way, even when they're competing. And third, you have Rousseau's idea, which is based on rational collective agreement. Each one is a completely different blueprint for how to live together.
All right, so we've gone from stories about the past to rules for the present. Now, let's zoom out, like way out. We're moving on from personal rules to something much, much bigger, trying to map and understand the massive, invisible systems that govern entire nations and economies.
This quote from Eric Williams is just so revealing. It shows how the fate of an entire empire could be decided not by what was best for the public, but by the hidden economic interests of just a few powerful sugar planters. It's a perfect example of a system at work, an invisible logic of private interest just steamrolling the public good.
And then you have thinkers like John Maynard Keynes, who tried to map this whole economic machine. His big insight was that the economy isn't some perfectly rational, self-correcting system. It's driven just as much by unpredictable human emotions, by what he called long-term expectation, as it is by any logical laws. And that's exactly why we have bubbles and crashes.
And as the historian Eric Hobsbawm shows, these grand systems weren't just economic. Ideologies themselves became these incredibly powerful, world-shaping forces. I mean, just look at this. In Italy, the Communist Party went from this tiny, illegal group before World War II to a massive party of almost 2 million members right after. An idea, a whole system of thought, had become the blueprint for trying to reshape an entire nation.
Okay, we've finally reached the top of our ladder of abstraction. And up here, the blueprint for reality isn't seen as a story, or a rule, or even as a system. It's seen as pure information itself. It's code.
Just let this sink in for a second. This idea from James Gleick completely reframes reality as we know it. It suggests that the fundamental building block of life itself isn't some mystical force, not a spark of life. It's information, it's words, instructions. It's a biological algorithm. And Shoshana Zuboff warns us how this information-first worldview is being used to build a new and pretty unprecedented form of power. Surveillance capitalism, as she calls it, is an economic system that takes our actual lives, our clicks, our likes, our movements, and turns all of it into raw data that can be used to predict and ultimately to shape our behavior.
So we've really gone on a journey here. We went from God steering human fate in epic poems to algorithms steering our choices through data streams. We've seen how each of these frameworks, story, rule, system, and now code, gave humanity a brand new, powerful way to both understand and shape its world.
So it really all leaves us with one final question. In this age of just overwhelming information, where all of these blueprints still coexist, which ones do you use? Which frameworks help you make sense of your own life and the world all around you? What is your blueprint for reality?